What if a birthday present conceals a poison sweeter than chocolate? In the summer of Boston, a web of confidence is undone under a mother-in-law's smile. Welcome to Revenza Tales, where love covers danger. Prepare yourself for a tale that sizzles with suspense. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to become a part of the intrigue. Comment your city below and let us know, have you ever questioned a loved one's motives? Enter Amy's universe, where any forkful may turn the world around. Boston's summer had the thick, heavy air of humidity, and Amy Collins was running her apartment air conditioner at full power. Cool air thrummed against the sweltering heat, a thin barrier as she sat at her desk. Her Macintosh monitor glowed with the intricate pattern of a new client's website, lines of code weaving a virtual tapestry. Amy was earning a reputation as an independent web designer, her abilities a subtle success amidst the city's clamor. "Honey, there's a call from my mom," Thomas shouted from the living room couch, his voice breaking into her concentration. Amy made a half-hearted shrug of her shoulders, a nervous habit. Her mother-in-law, Patricia, calls too often were stressful, an underlying storm of words beneath polite surface. "What does she say?" Amy asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, her voice protective. Thomas looked at his cell phone, its screen illuminating his face softly. "She's inviting us to have dinner at her house next Sunday," he said, a grin seeping in. "She wants to celebrate your birthday." Amy breathed deeply, the hum of the air conditioner filling the space. Patricia Collins was courteous on the surface, her smile a skilled veneer, but always seemed to be something lurking behind her words, something Amy couldn't quite get a hold of. 3 years of marriage had passed, and Amy had never received real warmth from her mother-in-law, only icy reserve. "I'll go if you'd like," Amy said, turning to catch Thomas's eyes. She could see how genuinely delighted he was, his eyes shining with excitement. Thomas was a money man, his keen judgment cutting through market trends at the office. But when it came to family, he was oddly blind, particularly when it came to his mother. "Wonderful," he said with a smile. "Mom has begun to accept you of late. She even told me the other day, Amy has become a good wife." Amy smiled back at him, but inside herself, suspicion knotted like a spring. It was not typical for Patricia to give compliments, a surprise that lacked sincerity. Actually, since the wedding day, Patricia had kept Amy at arm's length as the woman who stole my son, an unspoken indictment. "Is Vanessa coming too?" Amy inquired cautiously, testing the family dynamics. "Oh, of course," Thomas replied nonchalantly, reclining against the sofa. "She's been staying at Mom's place lately." Vanessa had after college flitted through a string of jobs that did not last, finally going back home to her mother. Amy did not miss the icicle-sharp jealousy in Vanessa's eyes. These eyes trailed her, eyes that gazed enviously at Thomas's decision. "All right." Amy resigned herself with a sigh, burden of duty weighing down. "Shall we bring something?" "No, she says she'll do everything herself," Thomas replied lightly. "Mom has promised to make everything herself." "Oh, and she mentioned she's preparing a special present for you." His voice sounded pleased, a childlike excitement in his words. Amy forced a smile, her mind flashing to past gifts. A sweater 3 sizes too small last Christmas. The Easter before that, a cake brimming with nuts, despite her known allergy. They were all things Patricia could easily dismiss with, "I didn't know," a convenient excuse. Evening, as Amy prepared vegetables in the kitchen, the scent of garlic wafting through the air, Thomas walked in. He slipped his arms around her from the back, his hold snug against her spine. "Thinking about something?" he asked softly, his breath caressing her ear. "Your mother," she replied truthfully, her knife ceasing mid-cut. Thomas's face darkened, a shadow passing over his features. "Are we beginning this all over again?" he said, his voice laced with annoyance. "Amy, Mom just wants to get along with you." Amy caught herself from protesting, the exchange a ritual dance. This had been done many times, a loop of miscommunication. Thomas never attempted to look beyond his mother's words and actions. For him, Patricia was the ideal mother, and if something was wrong, then it had to be Amy's fault. "I'm sorry," Amy said, forcing the words out. "I'm just tired." Thomas kissed her forehead to show forgiveness, but a small dissatisfaction lingered in his eyes. During these 3 years, tension in Amy and Thomas's relationship had gradually increased. At the beginning of their marriage, Thomas had acted protectively, shielding her from his mother's interference. But as time passed, he was gradually pulled back into the vortex of his original family. When the weekend finally came, Amy met her friend Jessica at a quaint cafe, its windows steamed with summer heat. "Going to your mother-in-law's place again?" Jessica queried, her look of surprise over her latte. "Last time didn't she tell me? There's too much salt in your cooking. I'm concerned about Thomas's health?" "Yes." Amy forced a bitter smile and stirred her coffee, the spoon softly clinking. "But I know that Thomas cherishes his relationship with his mother. Family is everything to him. Isn't he your family?" Jessica frowned, her concern growing. "Thomas doesn't complain when Patricia and Vanessa constantly look down on you." Amy agitated her coffee reflectively, the liquid churning with her discomfort. "He doesn't notice," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the eyes of his father, his mother is perfect." Jessica pressed her friend's hand, her hold firm. "Be careful," she cautioned, her voice stern. "I don't think Patricia actually accepts you." Amy nodded, the same suspicion resonating in her chest. With every visit, she felt Patricia's veiled sarcasm, a dig in every compliment. Vanessa's icy glares only exacerbated the divide, a jealousy seething under the surface. But she loved Thomas and put up with it for his sake, a sacrifice integrated into their marriage. The day before her birthday, Thomas kissed Amy, his lips gentle against hers. "Tomorrow will be a great day," he vowed, his eyes shining with promise. As Amy slept in bed, she wished it could be so, the sheets cool against her skin. But somewhere in her heart, she knew that tomorrow's visit would bring fresh tension. As she closed her eyes, Patricia's artificial smile came to mind, the real feelings behind it unknown. The massing of tiny insults and deliberate disconsideration over 3 years had developed a lasting nervousness in Amy. Amy's birthday morning started with a bright blue sky, the sun shining through the curtains. As she made breakfast, the smell of toast and coffee wafting through the kitchen, the intercom rang. "Delivery for you," a voice crackled. "Refrigerated package." Amy stepped to the door, her bare feet making a padding sound on the floor, and took a package from the delivery man. She scanned the name of the sender, reading Patricia Collins, the ink a heavy dark on the label. She was a little surprised at the surprise gift, her fingers outlining the chilled box. "Thomas, something came from your mother," she called, a note of curiosity in her voice. Thomas came out of the bathroom, towel drying his hair, and stood gazing at the package. "It's probably a birthday gift," he stated, his voice excited. "Open it," he exclaimed. Amy gently unpeeled the package, the adhesive ripping softly off. There was a beautiful black box inside, its surface shining with Chateau Chocolatier embossed in gold letters. It was the name of Boston's finest chocolate store, a name that spoke of excess. "Wow, Mom's indulging," said Thomas, awed, his eyes wide with wonder. "These chocolates are over $100 for a box." Within the box were chocolates of different shapes, all exquisitely displayed, their shiny surfaces glinting in the light. On it was a small card, its edge crisp and welcoming. Amy took it up and read, her eyes slightly narrowed. "Specially chosen just for you," it read, the writing Patricia's neat handwriting. "See." Thomas beamed, his grin wide. "Mom has finally welcomed you, sending such pricey chocolates." Amy smiled, but discomfort gnawed deep within, a knot she could not untie. She could not imagine Patricia would change so abruptly, the gesture too sudden. Yet, to see Thomas's beaming face, she swallowed her skepticism, the words lodged in her throat. That's very thoughtful, she said, her voice measured. I'll enjoy them later. All day, Amy immersed herself in her web design work, the screen's glow a distraction from her thoughts. In the evening, Thomas came home early and stood in the kitchen, preparing a special birthday dinner. The scent of roasted chicken and herbs wafted through the apartment, a warm contrast to her unease. Amy rested on the living room sofa, easing the exhaustion of the day with a sigh. Dinner's ready, Thomas announced, his tone bright. The dinner went through in a friendly mood, the clinking of glasses a gentle symphony. Thomas poured a bottle of wine, its rich red churning in the glass. Happy birthday, my love, he toasted, his gaze fixed on hers. I'll be with you forever. After the meal, while Thomas cleaned the kitchen, he found the chocolate box on the counter. How about some dessert? He suggested, opening the box with a grin. This looks delicious. Amy was tired, her body heavy with the day's work. I'm a bit full now, she said, shaking her head. I'll have some tomorrow. Just one won't hurt, right? Thomas replied, already popping a chocolate into his mouth. Wow, this is really delicious. Amy smiled, her tiredness tempering her reply. I will look forward to tasting them tomorrow. Just one more, said Thomas, eating another one, his fervor unabated. Amy did not mind and went to shower, the warm water removing her weariness. Weary, she turned in early and fell asleep immediately, the house quiet around her. Thomas remained in the lounge, watching television, unknowingly munching on one chocolate after another. The next morning when Amy woke up, the sunlight filtering through the curtains, Thomas was already awake. When she went to the kitchen, he was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, his face calm. Good morning, birthday girl, he said, his smile warm. That ended yesterday. Amy laughed, the sound light. I think I'll try those chocolates now. As she entered the living room, she spotted the vacant chocolate box on the table with its lid askew. Thomas, did you finish them all? She inquired in a tone both amused and surprised. Thomas nodded sheepishly, rubbing the back of his neck. Sorry, he said in a sheepish tone. Before I knew it, I'd consumed them all. They were simply scrumptious. Amy was a bit let down, the excitement dwindling, but it wasn't a concern. Well, that's all right, she shrugged. You can get me more another time. As if on cue, the phone rang, its ear-piercing ring shattering the quiet of the morning. The screen read Patricia Collins, the name an electric shock. Oh, it's your mom, Amy said, her heart racing. She picked up the phone, her voice firm. Hello, Patricia. Good morning, Amy. Patricia's voice was brighter than normal, a tune too dulcet. Yesterday was your birthday. Congratulations. Thank you, Amy said, her distrust bubbling. And the chocolates arrived, she said, feeling out the situation. Oh, good, Patricia said cheerfully, the tone almost too enthusiastic. How were the chocolates? I picked something special. Amy responded with laughter, covering up her discomfort. Well, Thomas devoured them all. There was a silence on the other end, the line thick with unsaid words. Then Amy heard Patricia's voice quiver, a crack in the pretense. Are you kidding me? That tone put Amy on guard, a shiver running up her spine. Patricia's response seemed to have more behind it than shocked surprise, a secret burden. Yes, he ate them all last night, Amy answered firmly. But he said they were good. Ah, Patricia's voice was gruff, tight with an emotion Amy couldn't identify. That's surprising. The call stopped badly, and as soon as Amy had hung up, Thomas's cell phone rang. Thomas wasn't looking well, his face going pale as he picked up the call. A couple of minutes later, he came back into the living room, his face pallid and sweat dripping from his brow. Amy, I just received a call from the hospital, he said, his words barely above a whisper. I have to go immediately. Sick. Thomas didn't get to say another word before he sprinted toward the bathroom, the forceful vomiting a cacophonous sound. With a shaking voice, he was able to get out. Call an ambulance. Amy rapidly dialed 911 with her shaking fingers punching in the digits. Thomas's situation quickly worsened. His gasps shallow. As she touched his forehead, she could sense the unnatural warmth, a burn of fever against the palm of her hand. "It's okay, Thomas," she said, her voice firm in the face of panic. "The ambulance will be there shortly." As the sound of the ambulance siren grew louder in the distance, Thomas's cell phone rang yet again. Amy watched as it lit up. "Mom!" She didn't pick up, a weird feeling spreading in her chest, dark and ominous. The sound of the siren grew closer, and Amy left the door of the apartment wide open, her heart pounding. The paramedics rushed into the room, moving hastily as they examined Thomas's condition. "He's indicating severe dehydration," one of them said, his tone abrupt as he moved. "He requires 4 fluids stat," one of the paramedics said, his tone urgent as he positioned the stretcher. "How long has he been indicating symptoms?" he asked, his gaze roaming over Thomas's ghostly figure. "He was a little pale when he woke up," Amy replied with a shaking voice, her hands locked together. "But got dramatically worse all of a sudden. Last night he didn't." She recalled the chocolates from her mother-in-law, a shiver running down her spine. Thomas was loaded onto a stretcher, his limp body being carried away by the paramedics with swift precision. Amy traveled in the ambulance, the vehicle swaying with every curve, its siren a screeching wail. She held Thomas's hand tightly, his skin clammy under her grasp. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead, and his face had turned gray, a stark contrast to his usual warmth. "It's okay, Thomas," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear. "We'll be at the hospital soon." When the ambulance arrived, the hospital doors slid open with a hiss. Thomas was immediately taken to the treatment room, the stretcher rolling away with urgency. Amy sat in the waiting room, her fingers trembling as she completed required forms. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, creating a bitter glare on the forms. She took out her cell phone and saw 5 missed calls from Patricia, the screen accusingly silent. Suddenly, the phone rang again, its vibration unsettling her nerves. "Hi, Patricia," Amy answered tightly. "Amy, where is Thomas?" Patricia's voice was nearly hysterical, cracking with panic. "Why isn't he answering his phone?" "He's in the hospital," Amy replied, her words measured. "He suddenly became very ill." "Which hospital?" Patricia demanded. "I'm coming right now." Amy told her the hospital name and hung up, the line going dead with a click. She was overcome with a strange feeling, a knot of suspicion tightening in her chest. Why was Patricia so panicked? And why did this happen? After the chocolate conversation, 30 minutes later, Patricia and Vanessa arrived at the hospital. Both looked distraught, their faces etched with worry, especially Patricia, whose eyes showed terror. "Where is he?" Patricia confronted the receptionist, her voice rising. "Where is my son?" Amy stood up and approached them, her steps hesitant yet determined. "They're treating him," she said, her tone calm. "I'm waiting for the doctor to come out." When Patricia came face to face with Amy, she winced for an instant, a flash of guilt passing over her face. "Then what?" She shook her head, her voice shaking. "Why now?" "I don't know," Amy retorted, scowling. "He was already sick when he got up." For an instant she paused before adding, "After having your chocolates." Patricia and Vanessa's faces paled under the bright hospital lights as color drained from them. They looked at each other, that silent language that caused Amy to shiver. Vanessa nibbled on her lip, twisting her hands in nervousness. "Chocolates," Patricia whispered, the word that weighed heavy with foreboding. "He consumed all of them." Amy noted their reactions, suspicion creeping in like a shadow. "Yes, all of them last night," she asserted firmly. "He wasn't feeling well in the morning." As he spoke, a doctor emerged in the waiting room, his crisp white coat a sharp contrast with the sterile walls. "Mrs. Collins, we have the first results of your husband's testing," he announced, his voice serious. The 3 closed in around the doctor, holding their breaths in anticipation. He's presenting signs of acute food poisoning, the doctor said, his brow creased. There's a more severe reaction than is present in usual food poisoning bacteria, so we're running further tests. Did he consume anything out of the ordinary? He queried, pen poised above a clipboard. Amy recalled the vacant chocolate box, the image flashing in her mind. He consumed luxurious chocolates last evening, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. The box is home. The doctor scowled, his face darkening. Would you bring the packaging? It may be used for analysis. I'll fetch it, Vanessa volunteered suddenly, her voice too enthusiastic. Give me your apartment address. Amy, though suspicious, gave her the address, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. Vanessa quickly left the hospital, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Doctor, Patricia turned to the doctor, her hands clasped tightly. Is my son going to be all right? We're administering an antidote now just in case, he replied, his tone cautious. Because the tests are showing some toxin reaction. Toxin? Amy's voice rose, a mix of fear and anger. What do you mean? The doctor spoke his words with precision. His eyes locked firm. We don't know for sure yet, he replied, his tone low. But from the symptoms and preliminary test results, we feel this is not common food poisoning. Patricia sank into a chair, her hands over her face, a sob bursting through her lips. No way. Vanessa came back 2 hours later, flushed from the hurry. She was not holding the box of chocolates, her hands free. I couldn't find it, she stammered, her voice shaking. Perhaps it was discarded in the wastebasket. Amy scowled, her distrust growing. It would have been on the living room end table. By this time, a man who introduced himself as a detective appeared at the hospital, his badge catching the light. Mrs. Collins, I need to ask you some questions, he said, his voice serious. Police. Patricia's voice shook, her eyes terrified. Why? Certain toxins were found in Thomas Collins's system, explained the detective, notebook open. We have to see what's going on. Amy laid a shaking hand against her cheek, the truth hitting home. Toxins? Good heavens, no. The detective wrote furiously on with his pen, scratching across the paper. Have you eaten or drunk anything unusual recently? He queried, his eyes fixed on Amy. Last night, fancy chocolates were delivered from my mother-in-law, she replied, her voice growing firmer. And my husband ate them all. The detective's eyes shifted to Patricia, his eyes piercing. Where did you buy these chocolates? Chateau Chocolatier, Patricia answered, her face going pale. But this is a misunderstanding. Is there any packaging or leftover chocolates? He asked, his voice relentless. Amy shook her head, her annoyance building. My sister-in-law had gone to get them, she said, her voice strained. But she told me she couldn't find them. The detective looked at Vanessa, his scrutiny intense. You really couldn't find them? Vanessa sat uneasily in her chair, her fingers twisting. No, they weren't there. After carefully observing the two, the detective said, as a precaution, we'll need to investigate the apartment. Amy nodded and handed over the keys, the metal cold in her palm. Then she headed to the treatment room to check on Thomas, her steps heavy. He was lying weakly, receiving 4 fluids, his chest rising and falling faintly. Amy, he said with dry lips, his voice a whisper. What happened? We don't know yet, she replied, her hand on his. But you'll get better. Don't worry. Under the nurse's watchful eye, Amy stepped into the hallway, her mind racing. As she was about to go to the restroom, passing a private room, she heard a small voice. Mom, the plan is over. Vanessa's voice spat, a panic edge to it. Shut up. Patricia's voice was quiet and furious, a contained rage. She could hear us. Amy froze and flattened herself against the wall, her breathing sharp. What are we going to do if the police look into this? There's no trail, Patricia said, her voice frantic. You got rid of the box, didn't you? Yes, but quiet, Vanessa breathed, her voice shaking. Just act like you know nothing. Thomas will be fine. The amount wasn't enough. Amy's chest ached ice cold, the truth a stiletto to her heart. She stepped back from the position and back into the waiting room on quivering legs, her mind in chaos. The grim reality of what Patricia and Vanessa had attempted was dawning, a conspiracy revealed. When the detective came back to the hospital, his face was serious, his jaw clenched. "We've recovered the chocolate box from the trash can," he announced. "It's been sent to the lab." Amy looked at Patricia and Vanessa, their faces now masks of fear, the color draining away. "We also found a box from a location other than your apartment's trash can," he continued. "Miss Vanessa Collins, from the trunk of your car." Vanessa tried to stand up from her chair, her movement abrupt. But another officer put a hand on her shoulder, his grasp tight. "Patricia Collins and Vanessa Collins," the detective declared, his tone firm. "I'm taking you in for questioning on suspicion of attempted murder." Amy was speechless, her breath catching in her throat. She could not believe the truth that her mother-in-law and sister-in-law had attempted to kill Thomas. Or more so, presumably had initially aimed to kill her, the target being switched in the dark. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Patricia glared at Amy with hard eyes, her mask slipping. "We will not give Thomas to someone such as you," she spat out, her voice cold. "That boy is our family." The hospital hallway was chilly, the air sterile as Amy remained seated in a plastic chair. She gripped a cup of coffee with shaking hands, its heat a weak solace. A few hours had gone by since Patricia and Vanessa were removed by the police, their footsteps fading. Thomas was resting in the intensive care unit, and the doctors had told her that his condition was stable. The critical phase now seemed to be over, a hope that was tenuous germinating. Amy shut her weary eyes, the lids weighed down with fatigue. She thought of past occurrences, the memories raw and distressing. Since her wedding, she had been plagued by a host of mysterious ailments. She would get headaches or nausea, particularly after going to her mother-in-law's house. Then she just figured it was stress, an easy cop-out. But now there came another explanation, a nefarious design unwinding. Her cell phone rang, the display reading Jessica, a lifeline in the midst of pandemonium. "Amy, are you okay?" Jessica's voice on the other end, anxious. "I heard on television that your husband was taken to the hospital due to poisoning." Amy recited the events, her sentences spilling out in haste. Jessica was a lawyer and a friend who could handle such emergencies with a level head. "What are the police doing?" Jessica asked, her voice objective. "They are interrogating Patricia and Vanessa on suspicion of trying to murder," Amy said. "It seems that arsenic traces were found in the chocolates." A sharp intake of breath could be heard from Jessica on the other end, a gasp of shock. "Amy, this is really serious," she said, her voice firm. "I'm coming over right now. Until then, don't talk to anyone." An hour later, Jessica arrived at the hospital, her presence a steady anchor. She began analyzing Amy's situation with professional eyes, her notebook open. "Think back to past events," Jessica said quietly, her pen poised. "Has Patricia ever shared food or drink with you? Especially just with you?" Amy concentrated, her mind rummaging through memory. "Now that you speak of it," she said slowly, "at the wedding party she brought wine specially. She served it only in my glass. Later, I fell dreadfully sick and was not even able to join in the wedding photography session. And then at Christmas," she went on, her voice shaking, "she made me special cookies just for me. After I ate them, I was in bed for 3 days, but I thought I had food poisoning." Jessica was taking it down in her notebook, her writing fast. "Anything else? Any possible evidence?" "I don't know," Amy confessed, furrowing her brow. But 2 weeks prior to Thomas being hospitalized, his work insurance changed. He said he had taken out a better life policy. Jessica's face set, her eyes glinting with narrowing speculation. "Who is the beneficiary?" she snapped, her voice pricked by sudden interest. Me and Thomas's mom, I think, he replied, his tone light, not realizing the tempest brewing. If something happens to you, both of you will be safe. Jessica rose, standing rigidly, her mind racing. Amy, this is obviously premeditated, she declared, her voice stern. You must report everything to the police. That evening, Amy revealed all her suspicions to the detective, talking in a galloping torrent. The detective nodded as he heard her out, his notebook bulging with her version. We will investigate, he assured her, his voice reassuring but serious. A week later, Thomas was permitted to be discharged from the hospital. He had lost weight, his body lean and still looking ill, dark circles under his eyes. But because of powerful medication, he had somehow recovered, a narrow win. Amy brought him home and nursed him silently, her hands firm as she made broth and watched his vital signs. Why would Mom do such a thing? Thomas muttered over and over, his voice hardly above a whisper. He looked unable to face the reality, his denial a defense against the hurt. Patricia and Vanessa had been temporarily released on bail, their liberty a bitter pill. They had attempted to call Thomas, their calls insistent, but Amy had blocked every number. Thomas's recovery was her only concern, a one-track mind amidst the mayhem. 3 days since discharge, Amy made a decision that weighed so heavily on her heart. She had to break her husband the news, no matter how she shattered him. While Thomas lay on the sofa, his body supported by pillows, she sat next to him. Thomas, we have to go to your mother's, she said firmly but in a gentle tone. He gazed at her with shocked eyes, his eyebrow furrowed. Why? Evidence, she said, placing her hand on his. You know this wasn't the first time, don't you? Thomas didn't say anything, looking away in silence, his eyes distant, the truth of her words dawning on him. I don't think Mom would actually do that, he exclaimed, his voice shaking. Trust me. Amy grasped her husband's hand tightly. For our future, we must understand the truth. The following day, although Thomas was not yet strong enough, he went along with Amy to Patricia's home. They picked a time when Patricia and Vanessa would be in the lawyer's office, making arrangements for the trial. Thomas carried a spare key, its cold metal in his hand as they walked toward the door. What are we looking for? Thomas whispered, his voice low as he opened the door. Anything out of the ordinary, Amy said, her heart thudding. Especially your mother's bedroom and desk. They entered the house softly, the air stale with familiarity, the silence heavy. Patricia's home, which they hadn't visited in a while, was as orderly as always, its surfaces pristine. Amy went up the stairs from the living room to Patricia's bedroom, her footsteps soft on the carpet. Thomas followed her, though hesitantly, his hand on the railing for support. It feels like we're invading Mom's privacy, he said, his voice laced with guilt. Your mother attempted to kill me. Amy's tone was icy, penetrating his skepticism. Patricia's bedroom was tastefully appointed, family portraits lined up on the bedside table as sentries. Amy opened the closet and moved onto the top shelves, her fingers trailing dust-smudged boxes. She discovered nothing but old sheets and discarded scarves. Let's go through the desk, she said, her voice firm. Patricia's desk was locked, but Thomas had forced the drawers open, the wood creaking in protest. Inside, documents were stacked with care, folders marked with precision. Amy rapidly scanned through the documents and came to a halt at one file, her breath catching. This is. It was a duplicate of Thomas's new life insurance policy, its pages crisp and damning. The beneficiaries were Amy and Patricia, as it should be, but there was a tiny mark beside Amy's name. A separate note stated, "To be changed." Looking deeper, they discovered another startling document. It was Amy's own life insurance policy, its presence a total surprise. Amy had no recollection of when Thomas had taken out this insurance, the dates merging. And the beneficiaries were Patricia and Vanessa, a betrayal in ink. "This is my life insurance," Amy stated, her voice shaking. "When did you take out this?" Thomas gazed at the paper with a white face, quivering hands. "I don't know," he confessed, his tone empty. "Mom said she'd take care of everything." Amy hid her face with shaking hands, reality a crushing burden. They had been scheming from the start, a conspiracy of years. In the space beneath the dresser, Amy retrieved a little box, its top dusty and concealed. Inside were pictures of her with needles inserted in them, voodoo-type pins thrust into her picture. In addition, different herbs and powders were kept in small jars with mysterious labels. "Thomas, see this," Amy whispered in horror. She opened the laptop on the edge of the desk, its screen illuminating to life. It was password, but Thomas attempted his mother's frequently used password, the keys clacking. The screen opened, showing a browser history that sent shivers down her spine. Searches for undetectable poisons, methods of slow poisoning, and life insurance fraud tutorial. Thomas sat down in a chair and cradled his head, his face pale. "I don't believe it," he said, his voice cracking. "Why would Mom?" They heard the door open downstairs, the sound sudden and crisp. They turned in shock, their hearts jumping. "What are you doing?" Vanessa stood at the bedroom door, her eyes wide. At sight of them, her face paled, a mask of shock falling. "You have no right to come in," she cried, her voice going high with accusation. Amy replied calmly, her hands not shaking with fear. "We're holding all of this as evidence. Evidence that you and your mother attempted to kill me." "Don't be silly," Vanessa snapped, her control unraveling. "There's no evidence." Thomas rose slowly, his voice a blend of anger and sadness. "Vanessa, why? Why would you and Mom?" Vanessa's face altered, her eyes glinting with hatred. "Why?" she repeated, her laughter sour, a blend of sadness and hatred. "Because everything was different after you married this woman. Our plans, our future." "What do you mean?" Thomas stammered. Vanessa's eyes hardened, her words pouring like venom. "Mom never planned to make you one of us from the start. Her aim was Thomas's property and your insurance money." Amy took the papers and held them out to Thomas, her hand firm. "Look," she said, her voice icy. "Your mother has borrowed money at large sums in your name. They were struggling financially." Thomas was rendered speechless, the reality breaking over him. And then, with an angry and sorrowful voice, he said, "Leave, Vanessa. I never want to see you again." "Thomas, you have to decide," Vanessa begged, her eyes pleading. "Your family, her or us. Family members who attempted to kill my wife." Thomas's voice was shaking, his fists balled. "Leave before I report you to the police." Amy stood with Thomas and grasped his hand, the two of them presenting an immovable front. They glared wordlessly at Vanessa, their determination an impenetrable wall. "This isn't over," Vanessa threatened, exiting the room, her footsteps sounding. Thomas's cell phone rang at that time, its sound crisp in the quiet. He took the call and, after conversing for several minutes, glanced at Amy with an altered face. "Mom has admitted everything." Autumn light shone down on the marble courthouse steps. Amy and Thomas walked out of the building, hand in hand, the verdict ringing in their ears. The agony of the lengthy trial was over, a page turned with justice. Patricia Collins was sentenced to 5 years in prison for assault and conspiracy. The act of intentionally preparing poison and continually putting Amy in harm's way was harsh, unyielding. Vanessa, who pleaded guilty as an accessory, was sentenced to 3 years suspended. Her attorney's contention that she had been acting on the influence of her mother was accepted, a mercy in part. Amy hugged Jacob close outside the courthouse, autumn wind cold on their faces. "You saved us, Jacob," she breathed, her voice filled with emotion. Jacob gazed up at his mother, his eyes shining. "Mommy, now it's just us two, isn't it?" "No." Amy smiled and smoothed a curl from his face. "We have each other. And it appears Grandma is taking care of us too." They strolled away hand in hand, their footsteps light with newfound liberty. 6 months since the trial, An autumn afternoon painted their new house golden. The house was a small house in a small Boston suburb, and it was a far cry from their former mansion. But it was full of warmth, its garden full of dancing fallen leaves. "Mommy, see," Jacob called, dashing in from school, a drawing held tight in his hands. "The teacher told me my picture would be on display in the art show." Amy took the drawing, her heart full at the picture of 3 women. Herself, Jacob, and her mother. "Wonderful, Jacob," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Grandma would be proud too." Jacob smiled, growing more confident. "Mommy, I'm glad I instructed you to leave that day." "Me too," Amy replied, hugging her son, tears shining in her eyes. After the ordeal, Jacob had been incredibly resilient, prompted by his psychological counselor. He'd formed friendships at his new school, his talent for art flourishing with every drawing. Amy had returned to work at the Oliver Museum, mending her emotional scars with every carefully selected piece. She was also setting up a foundation, utilizing some of her mother's inheritance. "Have you chosen a name for the new foundation?" Jacob inquired, his interest taking a piquant turn. "I'm considering naming it Reversed Dream," replied Amy, her smile gentle. "It means a first step toward a new dream." Richard's prison years, on the other hand, were dark, his spirit shattered. He made successive appeals alleging, "It's a false charge conceived by delusions of my wife and fantasies of my daughter." But the prosecution's evidence, tapes, insurance papers, signs of arson, were immense. Peers attested to his decades of deception, his business a house of cards. The irony intensified with the breakdown of his bond with Helen. Richard's trial blame had cut their connection, leaving Helen alone in prison. She mumbled to prisoners, "It was for my son," her voice an empty echo. One afternoon, Amy rummaged through her mother's last possessions, the chore bittersweet. Among old notebooks, she discovered an envelope, its seal intact. Inside was a handwritten note, dated 2 weeks prior to her mother's death. "Richard came to me with an investment deal, but I turned him down," it said. "I discovered his business was in trouble." Amy's hands trembled as she turned the letter over to the police. It prompted a new inquiry, suspicion now surrounding her mother's unexplained illness. Amy shoved the idea away, not wanting to confront it head-on. On Christmas Eve, heat emanated from the fireplace in their new house. Jacob's counselor Michael was there with them, his presence a gentle comfort. In 6 months, he'd evolved from professional to friend, now a person like family. "Mommy," Jacob spoke up abruptly, his voice reflective, "what is a real family?" Amy hesitated, her eyes softening. "It's not about blood relations," she said softly. "It's about taking care of and looking out for one another." Jacob nodded, his comprehension obvious. "That's why we became a real family." She canted her head, her gaze on Michael. "Weren't Grandma and Daddy family?" "They loved each other," Amy told him, her voice soft. "But it wasn't healthy love. Wishful thinking for the other's freedom and happiness. That's true love. It's not using someone for your own needs." Jacob grinned at Michael. "What about Michael?" he asked, his naivety causing Amy's cheeks to redden. Michael smiled, his grin warm. "That's something we'll all talk about someday." Snow began falling outside, blanketing the world in quiet anticipation. Amy held Jacob close, her voice a whisper. "Your courage created our new life." With those words, they stepped toward a future bright with hope. In Revenza tales, courage uncovers the darkest plots, proving love and trust forge the strongest bonds. This tale, drawn from life's shadows, teaches us that true family rises from protection, not possession. Did Emma's courage encourage you to trust your gut? Leave your comments and your city below. Where has this story touched your heart? Like, subscribe, and super support to keep the stories alive. Uncover more mysteries in the links. And may your heart be strengthened in every adversity.